gotta stay hydrated. This is one of my favorite new little bottles. It keeps my water very cold throughout the day, and I just love it.
Welcome back to my channel. I'm here with another video on the topic of self-care. I know my previous video was all about mental health and how May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so I thought it was fitting to share another video surrounding that topic. And I think self-care and soul-care go right in perfectly with the topic of mental health. So before I get started, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel so that you'll never miss a video all about wellness, healing, faith, purpose, and personal development. Thank you in advance for doing that. So as I recently mentioned, today's video is about the topic of self-care. And while we might be very familiar with that term, and some of us may practice self-care, I just want to define what self-care is for those who might not know, or who might kind of sort of have an idea but don't really know what it is. It sounds pretty self-explanatory, but I never want to assume that people know what it is and how to define it. So as always, I went to my best friend Google and just looked up what is self-care. But what I did was I looked up the definition of self, and then I looked up the definition of care, and I thought it was pretty interesting. So I'll share with you my findings. So the self is defined as a person's essential being that distinguishes them from others. It is your sense of who you are deep down inside. So essentially the self is like your core. It's who you are and how you show up in the world, right? And so care is defined as the provision of what is necessary for the health, welfare, maintenance, and protection of someone or something. And it also has the other definition of care being serious attention or consideration applied to doing something correctly or to avoid damage or risk. So I thought that those definitions of self and care were amazing, right? And so I kind of paraphrased it and put it into my own words. So I now define self-care as the intentional provision and consideration applied to the core of who we are as a way of maintaining our health and welfare. So when I think about these definitions, and when I think about the way I recently just defined what self-care is, it makes me think about it in a whole new way. Like, these definitions and the words in these definitions speak so profoundly, and it makes me realize how important self-care actually is. A lot of times we think of self-care as like getting our nails done or getting a facial, and while that could be a form of self-care, I think it's so much deeper than that, right? If the self is who we are at our core, it's not just physical, it is a spiritual thing, right? It is what is inside of us. It is our internal selves. So what are you doing? What are we doing to honor the core of who we are, and to intentionally consider and do things that help to protect it, right? So that our welfare and our well-being is not put at risk. So now that we got that out the way, I just want to set the tone with just a few affirmations. Feel free to pause this video as you are listening to these affirmations if you want to write them down so that you can, journal about them later, or just have them in your back pocket, right? Excuse me. So the first affirmation that I want to share goes a little something like this. My practice of self-care is an essential practice of self-love. And I love that affirmation, because when I think of intentionally considering myself and my well-being, it is also a form of practicing self-love, right? Because I love myself, right? I'm going to care for myself. I'm going to make sure that I'm not doing things that are putting myself, my spirit, my well-being at risk. I'm going to make sure I'm not going to put myself in situations or in environments that are going to put me at risk. And that comes from me practicing self-love. Therefore, I am willing to practice self-care and considering and watching out for myself, right? The next affirmation that I want to share goes like this. I can take time for myself as often as I need to without feeling guilt or shame. So I just want to gently remind you that your self-care is important, okay? You are important and you matter. And so if somebody is trying or has tried to make you feel guilty or ashamed for looking out for yourself and for caring for yourself intentionally, then they don't deserve you, okay? And no, we're not doing that, okay? So, and even not even other people, sometimes when we do things to make ourselves feel good, or when we do things to care for ourselves, a lot of times, many people, I myself, I am a nurturer, right? I am naturally, a caretaker. I am a very selfless person. And so a lot of times, I always make myself available to help other people out, to listen to them, or just whatever the case may be, to help them feel better, right? And so sometimes I can feel a little bit guilty for being like, you know what, I'm going to take time for myself. I would love to help you, but I can't right now, right? Because sometimes we need ourselves more than other people need us. And so it's important for us to keep that in mind when it comes to practicing our self-care and being active with our practice, that we're not also doing that and practicing self-love and self-care with guilt, right? Because who wants to do something that makes ourselves feel good or rejuvenated or refreshed, but in the back of our mind or spirit, there's guilt and shame lingering, right? It takes away from the essence, and it takes away from, the benefits that who we are and that ourself can actually experience in that moment of us taking care of ourselves. So I just want to offer those affirmations to you all. I hope that got the tone for this conversation set, and I hope you're ready to move forward. So I just want to ask a few questions. Ask a few questions and consider writing these down as well. I have my journal all the time, so I'm always writing questions to myself and answers and things. So I encourage you to do the same. So in terms of our conversation for today's video, one of the questions I want to ask is, are you practicing self-care, right? Be honest with yourself. When was the last time you intentionally practiced self-care? When was the last time? Was it yesterday? Was it a week ago? Was it a month ago? Was it a year ago? Right? Be honest with yourself. When was the last time that you intentionally took time to consider yourself and to make sure that you are in the best way possible, mentally, physically, spiritually? When was the last time you did something for yourself to make you feel good and to make you feel refreshed and to make you feel like your spirit and your mind is not at risk, right? Because we're thriving and we're healing and we're growing, okay? And so we can't heal, we can't thrive, we can't embody wellness without taking care of ourselves. So I just want to encourage you to find some time. If you're not the type of person who has a self-care practice, now is a great time to start figuring out, what can I do for myself that is a form of self-care, right? And when you think about the term and the idea of self-care, I really want you to consider the definition I provided earlier in this video, right? And if you need a gentle reminder or just a refresher of what self-care is, I will reshare the definition that I provided recently. So self-care is intentional provision and consideration applied to the core of who we are, right? So it's intentional. Our self-care practice should be something with purpose, right? We should, whatever we do for our self-care practice, and it varies according to each person and what our needs are, it should be purposeful, and we should do it with a certain intention in mind. And hopefully the intention is to maintain the health and welfare of who we are, right? And we can't be who we are in the world or to others if we are not being that for ourselves, and if we're not tending to ourselves the way that we might sometimes tend to others, for those who are very selfless and very nurturing, right? And when was the last time you felt good, right? When was the last time you were like, wow, I feel really good. I feel really good mentally. I feel really good spiritually. I feel really good emotionally. When was the last time? I know there's been a lot going on in this world, and there still is, right? There's always something to potentially take our feelings of good away or to rob us of that. But I just want to encourage you to do whatever you can and try as hard as you can to make sure that you never allow anything or anyone to rob you of your joy and to rob you of your welfare, right? And not only physical welfare or financial, but really spiritually and emotionally, because those things are priceless, right? Emotional welfare, spiritual welfare, mental welfare is just something that I think is so important, which is why I'm having this conversation with you all. So I just want to share a few gentle reminders, whether you practice self-care every single day or whether you've never really intentionally practiced self-care at all, it doesn't matter. I always like to encourage people to meet yourself where you are, right? It doesn't matter what you didn't do yesterday or whatever. What matters is what you're choosing to do today and how you're going to allow those choices to continue to influence you moving forward, because the past is the past, right? And we can't dwell on it, but we can learn from it and grow from it and only move forward, and reminding ourselves to take it day by day. So I hope these gentle reminders on the topic of self-care will serve you well. I hope that when it comes to your self-care practice and tying this into mental health and mental well-being as well, that you are able to keep these gentle reminders in mind. So the first one that I offer goes, it is about what you need rather than what we see other people doing. So I think that's important to keep in mind, because I need to readjust myself. I think it's important for us to keep that in mind because, when we look on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and we see people talking about self-care, a lot of times it's very cliche type of self-care practices. And what I mean by that is, it's typically maybe somebody with a face mask on, right, doing a facial routine, or it's somebody, with their nails done or getting a massage or whatever the case may be. And I'm not saying that to invalidate the power of self-care and that those things, are not self-care. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is I think sometimes it can lead to a misconception about what self-care actually is. And people might assume that it's just, a physical thing, getting my nails done, getting a facial, getting my hair done. And while those things might make you feel good, I think we have to look a little bit deeper into self-care, and we have to ask ourselves, is the thing that we're practicing self-care, is it actually contributing to maintaining the core of who we are, right? Is getting a facial or getting a nails done or a massage, is that really providing benefits to the core and the essence of who we are? And is it helping us to maintain our welfare? Or is it just something that makes us feel good? And, it's definitely okay to get your nails done or to, get a facial or whatever the case may be. But I also think it's important to have a self-care practice that is a little bit deeper than that can make sure that it's helping to maintain ourselves spiritually and mentally and emotionally as well. So, don't think that, I have to, in order to practice self-care, I have to do what people are doing. No, it's a very personal experience and it's a very personal practice. So what I might do for my self-care and the way that I intentionally maintain the well-being of myself mentally, spiritually, the core of who I am might be different from the way somebody else does. And that takes a level of self-awareness. You have to know yourself in order to know what is going to help yourself, right? The next gentle reminder that I want to offer is an hour of self-care one day of the week is better than none at all, right? An hour of self-care one day a week is better than no self-care at all. And under this gentle reminder, I have a quote that I got from a book called Daring Greatly, and it's right here by Brene Brown. And she talks about, guilt and shame and things like that. And one of the quotes in there, I believe it was from somebody else who she interviewed in the book, but they said something that spoke so profoundly to me. And she said, "Don't let perfect be the enemy of good." And when I read that quote, when I was reading the book, I automatically wrote it on a notepad so that I can stick it on the whiteboard that I have in my room to constantly remind myself that I don't have to be perfect, right? My self-care routine doesn't have to be perfect. I don't have to be perfect, right? And everything I do doesn't have to be perfect, right? But I can consider it good enough. And so in terms of this conversation and in terms of self-care and self-care practice, if you don't have time to do something every single day, sometimes we're very busy and it can become easy for us to neglect ourselves or kind of just forget about our routines or whatever the case may be. But if you practice intentionally and if you intentionally set aside a time, at least one day a week for self-care, that'll probably provide you with so much benefits than you can possibly imagine, rather than not doing it at all. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. And I want you to apply that to everything else that you do in life. You don't have to be perfect, right? Because you're enough and you're good enough, right? And what you do with intention and what you do with purpose, that's what matters. My last gentle reminder that I want to offer is self-care should not be seen as engaging in an unhealthy habit just because it makes you feel good. Something can feel good and still be detrimental to our ultimate health and well-being. So I wanted to say that because when we think of self-care, once again, we think of I need some self-care. I need to feel good, right? And that might look different for each person. And sometimes people might think, getting drunk or drinking alcohol or smoking or whatever is self-care just because it makes them feel good. But is it actually providing positive benefits to your health and your wealth at the end of the day, right? And I'm not saying don't smoke or don't drink. I'm not saying that. But if you're seeing those things as a self-care practice, I would encourage you to rethink what self-care actually is, right? Is the habits that we engage in sometimes that we do because they make us feel good, are they contributing to the maintenance of our core and who we are, or is it kind of having a negative effect more than a positive effect? And so before I end this video, I just want to I want to offer some ways to practice self-care. Like I said, these are just what came to the top of my mind when I was writing it down. you can definitely consider these as well, just to get your journey started if you're not really familiar with practicing self-care. And then, add to it, or just take what resonates and leave what doesn't. So, ways to practice self-care, I have going on a walk outside, disconnecting from technology, so important, cooking a healthy homemade meal, reading a book, or taking a nap. Never underestimate the power of a good nap, okay? Stretching, meditating, taking time to ground your mind, and engaging in a hobby that you enjoy, right? So I would like to think that all of these things, all of these ways to practice self-care, going back to our definition and how I defined self-care earlier, I would like to believe that if somebody were to practice these ways of self-care, that it would help to maintain their core and who they are. It would offer a sense of care and intentional consideration to help, make sure that their well-being and their health and welfare is well taken care of. But like I said, you definitely don't have to take these and start doing them. Do what works for you. Do what works for you. Do what serves your core the most, right? And just take a moment sometime today just to practice whatever that self-care thing is for you, okay? I can talk about this topic all day long, but I don't want to talk your ears off. But I feel like what I offered will offer some value to you all, whether, like I said, you're just now getting started practicing self-care, or whether you've been doing it but can maybe afford to make a few little tweaks and changes and adjustments. That's always okay as well, because as we grow and as we continue to evolve and change and unfold, so do the way our needs are met change as well. I think I said that right, but I think you guys know what I'm trying to say. So yeah, just want to remind you to practice self-care, continue to honor yourself, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel if you are interested in conversations like these. And until next time, I will talk to y'all later. Bye.